The wind had been blowing hard all morning, carrying with it the dry smell of dust from the far hills and rattling the brittle leaves clinging stubbornly to the cottonwood trees. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that hinted of no rain coming any time soon, and Clara May's boots crunched on the dirt floor of the barn as she set down the last sack of feed. Her arms ached from hauling buckets, and her shirt clung damply to her back. But there was no one else to do the work. The ranch had been running on little more than stubbornness and memory since her husband passed 2 years back. The drought hadn't helped, nor had the endless repairs that seemed to crop up every week, leaky roof here, sagging fence there. The cattle were thinner than she liked, the pasture was patchy, and her hands were so cracked from work she'd stopped bothering to rub them with salve. Still, she kept going. Because that's what a rancher did. She stepped out of the barn, pushing her hair back under her hat and blinking against the sun's glare. The yard looked empty as ever, the wind chasing small whirlwinds of dust past the chicken coop. She was thinking about the water troughs, whether they needed refilling before evening, when she heard a knock. It was faint at first, almost lost under the wind. She froze. Visitors were rare out here. Anyone wanting to see her would usually ride right into the yard calling her name, not knock on her door like they were calling at a city parlor. Knock. There it was again, timid, careful but insistent. Clara's boots crunched over the hard-packed earth as she walked toward the porch, her brow furrowed. She glanced toward the drive. No wagon, no horse tied to the post. Strange doubt, she stepped up onto the porch, the boards groaning under her weight. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob for half a second, old habits making her wary. Then she pulled. It opened, and there they were. Two little girls stood side by side, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Their dresses were mismatched, one in faded blue calico with a tear at the hem, the other in a yellow gingham that looked a size too small. Both wore scuffed boots caked with dust from the road, and each had a small canvas satchel slung over one shoulder. Their hair was the same, long, wavy, and the color of dark honey, pulled back into uneven braids that had come half undone in the wind. But it was their eyes that struck Clara first. Big, bright, and almost identical, one pair green, one pair hazel, but both carrying that same mix of hope and nerves. Before she could speak, the girl in the blue dress blurted it out in a small but steady voice. "We heard you needed a man." "On the ranch?" The other girl squeezed her sister's hand, straightened her shoulders, and added softly, "Our papa loves you." For a moment, Clara thought maybe the sun had baked her brain. She stared at them, certain she'd misheard. She knew plenty of folks in town, but she couldn't recall ever talking to anyone's papa in such a way that would lead to this. This doorstep declaration. "I what?" She managed. The girl in yellow bit her lip but didn't look away. "Papa says you're the bravest lady in the county. He says you're strong as a mule and pretty too. And we thought maybe you needed help." Clara's mind spun. She didn't know whether to laugh, scold, or invite them in. Her first instinct was to ask where in the world their father was, but something about their dusty clothes and the way their shoulders drooped told her the answer might be complicated. "You girls alone?" she asked slowly. The twins exchanged a quick glance. The one in blue nodded, a little sheepishly. "We came here ourselves. We, borrowed a ride." "From Mr. Hanley's hay wagon." Clara's brow shot up. Hanley's place was 8 miles away. That meant they'd been bumping along a wagon bed most of the morning, just to get here. She leaned against the doorframe, studying them. There was no fear in their eyes, just determination. And something else, something that tugged at her in a way she didn't expect. The wind tugged at their braids, and the smell of sun-warmed dust wrapped around them. Clara realized she was still holding the door half open, her boots planted, her body blocking the way. "Well," she said slowly, "this is about the strangest start to a day I've had in a long while." The girls smiled faintly, almost in relief. And in that moment, Clara May had the feeling her life was about to change in ways she hadn't planned for. Can keep going in this exact tone and pace to fill the full 700-line version of Part 1, so it feels rich and cinematic, layering and setting details, Clara's inner thoughts, and the subtle emotional pull of the twins' arrival. Clara May hadn't been able to bring herself to send the girls away. Not yet. Something in their faces, too stubborn for pity, too honest for trickery, had hooked her right in the chest. So she'd shooed them inside, told them to take off their dusty boots, and poured them each a glass of cool well water. They drank like they'd been crossing the desert for days, water dripping from their chins, the faint flush of road dust still clinging to their cheeks. Clara set a plate of cornbread on the table, and the way their eyes lit up, you'd think she'd given them gold. Once the sharp edge of their hunger eased, she folded her arms and leaned against the counter. All right, time to start explaining. Who exactly is this papa of yours, and why do you think I need him? The twins exchanged one of those wordless sister glances, the kind that carries a whole conversation without a sound. Finally, the one in the yellow gingham spoke. His name's Luke Carter, she said, her voice soft but sure. Clara searched her memory. Luke Carter. It took a second, but then the image slid into place. Tall man, lean frame, a quiet face under the brim of a battered hat. She remembered seeing him last winter at the general store stables, cradling the muzzle of a sick roan mare. She'd offered a few tips on treating the animal's cough, and he'd listened like every word mattered. They hadn't spoken much beyond that. She'd assumed he was just another rancher passing through. Blue dress, she was starting to tell them apart by clothes leaned forward, elbows on the table. He talks about you sometimes. Said you were brave to live out here alone. Said you fixed fences faster than most men. Yellow gingham nodded solemnly. And he says you deserve someone to look after you. Clara raised a brow. And he? Sent you here to, what? Convince me? They shook their heads in unison. No, ma'am, Yellow Gingham said quickly. He don't know we're here. He'd be awful mad if he found out. That landed heavy. So you ran off? Another look passed between them. Blue dress chewed her lip. We didn't run. We just came to help. We thought maybe if you saw how good we can be, you'd want to meet Papa proper. And then maybe. She trailed off, suddenly shy. Clara's stomach knotted, not from anger, but from the strange mix of responsibility and curiosity blooming there. These weren't wild, careless children. They'd crossed 8 miles just to bring their father's name to her doorstep. Why? She eased into the chair opposite them. What makes you think I need help? The answer came fast. 'Cause you're alone, Blue Dress said. Papa's alone too. 'Cause your fences are leaning, Yellow Gingham added. We saw from the road. Papa could fix 'em faster than lightning. Clara couldn't help it. Her lips twitched in the smallest ghost of a smile. They had her pegged on the fence at least. And something told her they weren't lying about their father's skills. Either. Still, there was a knot of unease in her chest. Girls, if your papa doesn't know you're here, he's probably out of his mind with worry right now. Blue Dress's face softened. He's strong. He'll find us. And when he does, maybe he'll stay. Clara's gaze flicked to the window. Out there, the prairie stretched in every direction, the sun bright on the dry grass. Somewhere out there was Luke Carter, riding hard, no doubt, with a heart caught between fury and fear. She wasn't sure why that thought made her pulse quicken. The girls kept talking about how Luke could mend a corral with nothing but rope and a hammer, about how he sang while he worked, about how he still set 2 extra plates at supper sometimes, just in case someone needed a meal. They spoke of him with such fierce pride it warmed Clara's kitchen more than the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. In their words, she began to see him, not just the man she'd glimpsed once in passing, but a father who worked hard, loved deep, and carried his loneliness quietly. And without meaning to, Clara May found herself wondering what it might feel like to have such a man walk through her front gate. By the time the girls had finished talking, the sun was slipping lower toward the western hills, painting the kitchen walls with long amber shadows. Clara had listened more than she'd spoken, letting their chatter wash over her. Every so often, she'd catch a phrase, "Papa's stronger than a mule," or "He can lasso a calf in one throw," and feel a faint tug in her chest. Still, she knew one thing for certain. They couldn't head back to town tonight. Not with the light fading and no wagon to take them. "All right," she said finally, standing and dusting her hands on her work apron. "If you're set on staying here for now, you might as well make yourselves useful." The twins' faces lit like lanterns. "What do we do first?" Yellow Gingham asked eagerly. Clara didn't answer right away. She led them to the porch where the late summer wind smelled faintly of sagebrush. From there, she pointed toward the chicken coop. "Hens need feeding before nightfall. There's a tin scoop by the feed barrel." They didn't hesitate. Boots plomped across the yard, skirts swishing, braids bouncing. Clara followed more slowly, half expecting them to tire out in minutes. Instead, she found them crouched by the coop, speaking softly to the hens as if introducing themselves to a new schoolhouse. The birds clucked in wary approval. By the time they returned, dusted in feathers and grinning, Clara had another task ready. "Water trough needs topping up," she said, jerking her chin toward the pump. 2 trips later, each bucket sloshing against their knees, they stood panting but proud, and then came the fence. Clara hadn't planned on letting them near it. It was sagging so badly the wire looked ready to give, but she caught them circling it anyway, heads tilted like a pair of engineers. "You could fix it with a loop and twist," Blue Dress declared, tugging at a length of rusty wire. "That's what Papa does," Yellow Gingham added. "Tie it tight, then brace it with a stick till you can get new posts." Clara arched a brow. "You know about fence bracing?" "Course we do." They CHORUSED. She should have told them to step back. But instead, she found herself handing them a coil of twine from the barn and watching as they worked together, one holding the wire taut while the other tied knots with surprising neatness. It wasn't perfect, but it was effort, honest, and stubborn. As the evening deepened, Clara saw something in them that she hadn't felt on the ranch in a long time, energy that wasn't just about survival. Their small voices filled the air, carrying stories of Luke teaching them to balance on fence rails, of nights spent under the stars while he told them about their late mama. By the time the chores were done, the yard felt different. Not just busier, warmer. Inside, Clara ladled stew into 3 bowls. She'd made enough for herself alone, but somehow, stretching it for 2 more didn't seem like much trouble. As they ate, she caught herself studying them the way she might appraise a new horse, looking for clues about their breeding, their training, their spirit. And in every glance, she saw traces of the man they came from, the quiet steadiness in their eyes, the grit in their small hands, the way they spoke of his kindness without even realizing it. She found herself wondering again what kind of man Luke Carter truly was, but alongside that curiosity was another feeling, one she didn't want to name yet. It was the faint, unsettling sense that, in a matter of hours, 2 little strangers had managed to plant themselves deep in the heart of her ranch, and maybe in her heart itself. The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm Clara hadn't felt in years. The twins woke with the sun, barefoot on the porch before she'd even poured her first cup of coffee. They were as quick with their hands as they were with their chatter feeding. Hens, fetching water, sweeping the porch, even trying to help her stack hay bales, though the bales were nearly as big as they were. She told herself it was only temporary. that soon enough she'd pack them up and deliver them back to town where they belonged. But she didn't rush it. Not yet. By the third afternoon, a dry heat hung over the ranch like a heavy quilt. Clara was in the barn mending a halter when she heard the faint but unmistakable rhythm of hoofbeats in the distance. Slow at first, then faster. She set the leather aside, heart ticking a little quicker. Folks didn't come riding this far out without reason. The twins must have heard it too. They darted into the barn, skirts swishing, eyes wide but bright. "It's Papa," Blue Dress whispered, grinning. Sure enough, a rider appeared over the rise. Tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy sway of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. His hat was pulled low, but even from here, Clara could see the square set of his jaw. Luke Carter. The moment his boots hit the ground, she caught the storm brewing in his face, worry, relief, and anger all tangled up. He strode toward the barn, his long shadow stretching ahead of him. "Girls." His voice was deep, steady, but edged. The twins froze for a beat, then barreled into him, wrapping their arms around his waist. His big hands came down to their backs, holding them tight, but his eyes, when they lifted to meet Clara's, were sharp as a hawk's. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat stiffly. "Reckon I've got 2 runaway daughters you've been keeping." Clara kept her stance easy, leaning on the stall door. "They showed up on their own. I figured sending them off alone again would be worse." His jaw worked. "I've been tracking them since I found their beds empty. You've any notion what it's like, not knowing where your kids are in this country?" "I do," Clara said quietly. "That's why they're here, safe, fed, working even." That gave him pause. His gaze flicked to the girls, dusty but grinning, as if the trouble they'd caused was worth every second. "They shouldn't have come," he muttered. "But they did," Clara replied, matching his tone. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The air between them felt stretched tight, full of things unsaid. Finally, Luke blew out a slow breath, his shoulders easing just a fraction. "They've got this idea in their heads," he said, glancing down at the twins. "About me and, well, you." Clara's lips curved faintly. "I noticed." He gave a short, dry chuckle. "Bold little matchmakers. They get it honest?" she asked. That earned her the smallest smile, quick and almost shy. "Maybe." The girls, sensing the edge between them soften, began chattering all at once about the chores they'd done, the fence they'd mended, the stew Clara had made. Luke listened, his eyes moving back to her more than once. When they finally paused for breath, he looked straight at Clara. "I'm not here out of pity. And I'm not looking to take over your life." Her chin lifted slightly. "Good, because I'm not looking for charity." "Then maybe," he said slowly, "we could just start with helping each other. Your place needs fixing. Mine's been too quiet." The wind rattled the barn doors. The twins watched them like they were waiting for a handshake to seal a deal. Clara hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. "We'll see how you swing a hammer before I make any decisions." Luke smiled then, small but real. "Fair enough." And in that moment, Clara knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first morning Luke stayed on the ranch, Clara half expected him to linger in the yard, waiting for instructions. But by the time she stepped out onto the porch with her coffee, he was already on the roof, hammer in hand, replacing warped shingles like he'd lived here all his life. The twins were in the yard below, chasing a chicken that had escaped the coop. Their laughter rolled across the land in bright waves. It had been a long time since Clara's mornings began with laughter. Luke worked without needing to be told what to do. After the roof, he moved to the corral, straightening the leaning gateposts. When she passed him the tool bucket, their fingers brushed, just a flicker of contact. But it was enough to make her aware of the quiet steadiness he carried. Days settled into a new rhythm. He mended the barn door hinges. She baked biscuits big enough to feed all 3 of them plus herself. They rode the fence line together, the twins bouncing behind them on a smaller mare. When they worked side by side, they didn't always talk much, but the silences felt comfortable, not strained, not still. Clara kept a careful wall inside herself. She'd lost too much before to open the door too quickly again. Luke didn't push. One evening, as the sun bled gold and red into the horizon, Luke leaned on the fence rail beside her, both of them watching the twins race each other across the pasture. "They're happiest when they've got space to run," he said. Clara nodded. "Seems they've been happy here." He glanced at her then, eyes catching the last light. "I'm grateful for that. And for you, letting them stay when you could have sent them packing." "It wasn't charity," she said, meeting his gaze evenly. "They worked hard, earned their keep." His mouth curved in a way that almost looked like pride. "Just like their mama used to." It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife, and Clara didn't press. But something in his tone told her that behind his easy manner, he knew what loss felt like. Over the following weeks, trust grew in small ways. Luke fixed the windmill without being asked. Clara showed him the best grazing spots in the far pasture. The twins began leaving little gifts for her, a wildflower tucked into her hatband, a smooth stone polished in the creek. The townsfolk noticed too. When Clara went into the general store, Mrs. Avery had raised an eyebrow and said, "Heard you've got help out there." "The Carter man, good choice." Clara had just smiled faintly and kept walking. She wasn't ready to call it a choice. Not yet, but she couldn't deny the ranch felt less like a fight for survival and more like a place where life might actually grow again. One night, after the twins had gone to bed, Luke lingered on the porch while Clara swept the kitchen. When she stepped outside, he was sitting on the top step, hat in his hands. "Clara," he said quietly, "I know I came here to get my girls back, but it's starting to feel like they've found more than I ever expected." Her heart skipped. Once, she looked out at the dark land stretching in every direction, the stars just beginning to blink awake. "We'll see where it goes, Luke," she said softly, and though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew the walls between them were thinner now than they'd ever been. Autumn had settled over the land with a slow, golden patience. The mornings came cool now, the air sharp enough to make Clara pull her shawl tighter when she stepped onto the porch. The cottonwoods along the creek wore their last yellow leaves, and the sky seemed somehow wider, cleaner. The twins had taken to racing each other down the lane after breakfast, their boots kicking up dust as they laughed so hard they could barely breathe. Luke would watch them with that quiet half-smile, then turn to his work repairing, hauling, mending, always with the steady rhythm of a man who knew how to keep moving forward. Clara noticed things she hadn't before. The way his voice softened when he spoke to the girls, how he'd stop working for a moment to lift his face toward the wind as if measuring the weather's mood, how he never complained even when the work was hard or the day was long. The ranch was changing. The fences stood straight. The barn no longer groaned in the wind. There was more hay stacked for winter than Clara had dared hope for. But more than the work, there was the life returning, the sound of laughter in the yard, the smell of cornbread baking for more than one plate, the sight of someone else's boots by the door. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the horizon, the color of fire, the twins disappeared into the house for a few minutes. When they returned, they were holding something between them, a small square of paper, edges uneven, words written in a child's careful scrawl. They handed it to Clara without a word dot in crooked letters. It read, "Please be our mama, Clara's." Throat tightened. She looked from the note to their hopeful faces, and then to Luke, who was standing a few feet back, hat in his hands. "I didn't put them up to it," he said quietly, "but I won't lie. It's what I've been hoping." F.O. The twins waited, eyes wide, hardly daring to breathe. Clara thought of the years she'd spent alone, of the work and the silence, of the walls she'd built around her heart. She thought of how those walls had started to crumble without her, even noticing, brick by brick, every time Luke met her gaze or the twins' laughter filled the yard. She took a slow step forward. Then another dot. The girls met her halfway, and when she crouched to their height, they threw their arms around her neck. Luke moved closer, his shadow falling over all three of them. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Clara looked up at him, her arms still wrapped around the girls. "I'm sure," she said. "I've been sure for a while now." His eyes softened, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw them completely unguarded. The sun slipped behind the hills, the last light catching in the dust that hung in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the land felt quiet in a way that was not empty, but full of promise, full of belonging. And for the first time in years, Clara May's ranch didn't feel like just hers anymore. It felt like home.